10 mind-blowing facts that school never taught you. What if some of the most fascinating truths about the world were never taught in school? Not because they weren't important, but because they didn't fit the version of history we were supposed to learn. From empires richer than Europe to maps that lied to your face, it's time to relearn the world. This is the knowledge your textbooks skipped, and by the end of this video, you'll never look at history the same way again. In the 14th century, while Europe was caught in wars, plagues, and poverty, a city in West Africa was booming with gold, knowledge, and architecture. Timbuktu, part of the Mali Empire, was home to one of the oldest universities in the world, the University of Sankore. Scholars there studied astronomy, medicine, law, and math long before European institutions caught up. At the center of it all was Mansa Musa, the emperor of Mali, and possibly the richest human being in history. During his pilgrimage to Mecca, he handed out so much gold that he caused massive inflation across several regions in North Africa. His empire's influence stretched across the Sahara and left a legacy of wealth, education, and urban development. So why wasn't this in your textbook? Because history, as it was taught, often came through a European lens, one that overlooked Africa's intellectual and economic dominance at the time. Think back to the world map you grew up with. Greenland looked almost as big as Africa, right? But that's completely false. Greenland is tiny compared to Africa. In fact, Africa is over 14 times larger. The problem lies with the Mercator projection, created in the 1500s to help sailors navigate. It greatly distorts the size of land masses the further they are from the equator. Europe appears huge, Africa seems average, and Antarctica looks like a continent-sized monster. But in truth, Africa is so vast that you can fit the United States, China, India, and most of Europe inside it, and still have room to spare. The real damage? Generations of students grew up thinking Europe and North America were the center of the world, not just culturally, but physically. Maps don't just show geography. They shape our perception of power. Albert Einstein, the mind behind the theory of relativity, was once offered the presidency of Israel. In 1952, after the death of Israel's first president, Chaim Weizmann, the government approached Einstein to take the position. Though the role was largely ceremonial, Einstein was a global icon, and they believed his name could bring unity and legitimacy to the young country. Einstein declined. In his own words, he said he lacked the experience and natural talent for dealing with people. He was a scientist, not a politician. And while he deeply supported Jewish cultural identity and education, he preferred to remain a thinker, not a leader. Imagine the headlines, "The president who discovered time isn't real." But Einstein chose humility and continued teaching at Princeton until his death. Once, there was a place that aimed to collect all the world's knowledge in one building. That place was the Library of Alexandria. Founded in Egypt over 2,000 years ago, the library is said to have held hundreds of thousands of scrolls, covering science, medicine, philosophy, astronomy, mathematics, and even early technology. Scholars from all over the world came to exchange ideas and translate texts. It was like the internet of the ancient world, before there was even paper as we know it. No one knows exactly how much was lost when it was destroyed. Fires, wars, and neglect over centuries slowly erased this treasure trove of human understanding. Many believe we could have discovered electricity, flight, or even space travel centuries earlier, if the knowledge from Alexandria had survived. And yet, in most classrooms, the library is barely more than a footnote. Napoleon wasn't short. You were lied to. Ask anyone to describe Napoleon Bonaparte, and most will say, short guy with a big ego. But here's the twist. Napoleon wasn't actually short. He stood around 5 feet 6 or 7 inches, which was perfectly average for Frenchmen in the early 1800s. The confusion came from two things. First, the French used a different system of measurement. Their feet were longer than British feet. Second, British propaganda painted him as a tiny, power-hungry man to humiliate him in the public eye. The image stuck. Cartoons exaggerated his height. Jokes became common. And eventually, Napoleon complex became a psychological term used to describe short men trying to prove themselves. But it was all based on a myth, one of the most successful smear campaigns in history. The Eiffel Tower can grow taller, but only in summer. The Eiffel Tower is one of the most iconic landmarks in the world. But did you know it actually changes height depending on the season? Because the tower is made of iron, it expands in heat and contracts in cold. During summer, when temperatures soar in Paris, the metal expands enough to make the Eiffel Tower grow by as much as 6 inches, or 15 centimeters. That means if you take two pictures from the exact same spot in January and July, the top of the tower won't line up perfectly. It's a beautiful, physical reminder of how even the biggest things in our world are constantly moving and changing, sometimes in ways we never notice. And no, you definitely didn't learn that in your physics class. Tomatoes were once thought to be poisonous. Today, tomatoes are everywhere, on pizza, in pasta, in ketchup. But not long ago, they were feared. In 18th century Europe, the tomato was called the poison apple. Wealthy aristocrats believed it caused illness and even death. But the real reason people were getting sick wasn't the tomato at all. It was their plates. Back then, plates were often made of pewter, a material that contains lead. Tomatoes are highly acidic, and when placed on pewter, the acid would draw out the lead, poisoning the person eating the food. So people blamed the tomato, not the toxic plates. It took decades before science and better tableware proved the tomato was innocent. Today, we can laugh about it, but it's a reminder of how easily fear and false assumptions can shape culture, even when the truth is right in front of us. Vikings didn't wear horned helmets. When you imagine a Viking, you probably see a fierce warrior with a horned helmet. But that image is completely made up. There's no archaeological evidence that Vikings ever wore helmets with horns into battle. In fact, it would have been wildly impractical. The horns would make fighting awkward and dangerous. So where did the idea come from? It started in the 19th century during a wave of romanticism and national pride in Scandinavia. Costume designers, especially for operas like Wagner's Ring Cycle, added horns to Viking costumes to make them look more dramatic and mythical. Over time, that image stuck. You're technically taller in the morning. When you wake up in the morning, you're slightly taller than you are by the end of the day. It's not magic, it's gravity. Throughout the day, the constant pressure of gravity compresses the soft discs between the vertebrae in your spine. As you move, stand, and sit, those discs lose a tiny bit of fluid, making you shrink by about half an inch or more, depending on your activity. When you sleep, your body relaxes, and the spinal discs slowly rehydrate and expand again. So after a full night of rest, you inflate a little. It's one of those hidden body facts that no one tells you, but it proves just how dynamic and adaptable the human body really is. Next time someone says they grew overnight, they might not be wrong. Cleopatra lived closer to the moon landing than to the building of the pyramids. When most people think of ancient Egypt, everything blends together. Pyramids, pharaohs, Cleopatra. But here's a fact that will completely change your sense of history. Cleopatra lived closer in time to the first moon landing than to the construction of the Great Pyramid of Giza. Let's break that down. The Great Pyramid was completed around 2560 BCE. Cleopatra ruled Egypt in the 1st century BCE, more than 2,400 years later. Meanwhile, the Apollo 11 moon landing happened in 1969 CE, just over 2,000 years after Cleopatra's reign. So while she ruled in what we call ancient times, the pyramids were already ancient to her. To Cleopatra, the pyramids were like Stonehenge or the Colosseum are to us, massive relics from a distant past. History is long, far longer than our brains are comfortable with. And timelines, once you really look at them, can bend your perception of reality. The world is full of truths that didn't make it into your school books. Sometimes because they were inconvenient, sometimes because they were misunderstood, and sometimes just forgotten. But knowing them gives you something powerful, perspective. It shows you that history isn't just a fixed story carved into stone. It's a puzzle with missing pieces, a conversation that's still ongoing, a lesson that's still being learned. If this video made you raise your eyebrows, question what you know, or simply say, "Wait, really?" then you're exactly where you should be. This is Lesson Lost. And the truth? We're just getting started. Don't forget to subscribe, because school might be over, but the lessons never end.